We are back
And
and
front.
front. Yes, back and front. And sides.
You have several.
One. Circles only have one side. Well,
Mm,
inside and outside.
I think there's more than one circle over there. But
Mm.
anyway, um, today we're back with another topic about prayer, not a specific prayer. And our topic comes kind of from Matthew chapter 6, verse 13. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So we're going to go a bit broader than just this one verse, but we're kind of going to be talking about protection, asking God for protection.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about yesterday's lesson with Jacob asking for protection from Esau.
Yes.
Because Esau, he was afraid Esau was going to try to kill him because, well, he had before.
Yeah. Most of us don't have a maniac brother who we've angered earlier in life who would like to kill us or we think would like to kill us.
Only your four sisters.
Well, yeah, only my four sisters. Well, they haven't angered me earlier in life, but
Oh,
um,
I don't know about
there have been times where they've upset me, but we move on. So most of us aren't going to be praying for protection from the same thing that Jacob was praying for
Yeah,
protection.
or for that matter, not necessarily even a crazy brother that wants to kill you, but just an enemy. I mean, we all have people that we don't like much, that don't like us much. But as far as, somebody that's actually a full-blown enemy,
Like, is going to physically
yeah, I
hurt
mean,
us?
we may have people who gossip about us or, say ugly things to us or something like that, but and obviously all of us could run up on a situation where somebody is violent or gets violent.
Mm.
That can happen. But as far as just having an enemy that we're dreading because, oh, this person is going to try to kill us, we don't really have that.
What do you mean
So
that doesn't happen to you on a day-to-day basis?
no,
Um,
hasn't happened in a couple days.
sorry.
So yeah, but we don't necessarily have that specific fear. Although, certainly some places they do. Christians who are being persecuted in some places there is a serious fear that someone is going to try to kill them.
Very much so.
Was in the first century too.
But nowadays, with everything that's been going on, we kind of are more likely to ask protection for something different, for protection from a disease or just from all the craziness that's been going on currently.
Or just something as simple as the dangers of traveling. I mean,
Hmm.
I was reading just yesterday, somebody was in a car wreck, somebody from Oklahoma, members of the church out there, but they were in a serious car wreck and they weren't sure if they were going to survive. I haven't seen an update today to know how that did turn out. Uh, but yeah, so there are always dangers out there, accidents, illnesses like COVID-19, um, wrecks on the highway, a drunk driver or something like that. Even though they may not have thought of you as an enemy or you may not have thought of them as an enemy, it can still wind up ending your life.
Yeah. And
So,
don't ever get caught up thinking, oh, well, I can't pray for God to protect me on a drive from here to there because that sure it worries me, but that's a tiny thing. God isn't going to be concerned about that. He's not going to answer my prayer over something like that, whether it worries me or not. No, God is our Father, and if something is important enough to you to pray about it, then it's important enough to him to listen.
absolutely. We sometimes of miss out on the blessings that God could give us because we just don't ask him. James talks about that. You don't receive because you don't ask.
Mhm.
God sometimes, we talked about how with Abraham, he answered the prayer that Abraham hadn't even asked, but hadn't even asked for it, but God gave it to him anyway. But a lot of times God's waiting for us to ask. He'll give it to us if we'll ask.
Yeah, and like we said before, be bold. That doesn't always mean ask for huge over the top things that are just insane that maybe could never happen. It just means if you think God isn't going to answer your prayer on this, then try it.
Yeah,
No harm in asking.
yeah, you've and on the other side of that too is as we think about God's protection, we do want to remember that primarily, and not just that God is concerned with our everyday, day-to-day life and needs and things like that. And we'll talk about needs and dependence on Him in another lesson. But He is concerned about us physically. But primarily, what He's concerned about is us spiritually. So when we're thinking about protection, we need not think that just because God doesn't protect someone from physical harm, that means He didn't answer the prayer, or that He didn't care about them.
Yes.
I think about in the New Testament, we see James is arrested by Herod, and Herod chops his head off. Then he gets Peter in prison. He's arrested. He's put in prison too. Now it says that people were all at Mary, the mother of John Mark's house, praying for Peter to be released from prison. They were praying for physical help, for his safety. But do you think that there weren't Christians praying for James when he was arrested and when he was put in prison?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sure, they were praying for him too. But it was not something that God saw fit to answer and protect him. So he allowed James to suffer that death. But then we know if we read the rest of that story, we know that he sent an angel to get Peter out. Peter wasn't done, but James apparently had done all he could. And ultimately, what God is going to want to do is bring about whatever is the best for fulfilling His will. And in some cases, that may mean us coming to physical harm or even death that can still bring about something better. And other times it may mean us escaping that harm. So just because somebody dies in a car wreck, or they get a disease and die of it, whether it's cancer or a heart attack, or whether it's this COVID-19 that we're dealing with right now, whatever it is, just because they die does not mean that God doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look for the ways that we can take that negative thing and turn it to good and serve God with it better.
It's difficult for us because we are in a physical world.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to see that, oh, well, God's still on my side, no matter what's going on here. Even if I am hurting, even if all this terrible stuff is happening, God is still with me and He is still protecting me. Because as Christians, we are members of a spiritual kingdom. His kingdom isn't of this world. And it's hard for us to distance ourselves from something we're right in the middle of constantly. But kind of what we need to do if we're going to remember what God is really protecting us from.
Yeah, we've got to take our focus off of the physical and keep it on the spiritual. And when Jesus tells us, pray for God to deliver us from evil, it's not always the things that we think of because they're physical problems. Those aren't always the evil.
Yeah.
Sometimes something else can be much more evil. And we see that in Job's life. God was watching out for him. God was setting limits and was only letting Satan do so much. We know in Romans, God tells us that He is not going to allow us to be tempted beyond what we're able to bear. So we know that He's there. We know that whatever happens, He believes that we can have the strength to make it through that, or He wouldn't allow it to happen to us.
Yeah. And sorry, while He does allow us to be tested and tempted in certain areas, we need to remember that if we do need help, He's right there for us. And sometimes I think one of the reasons that we don't make it through a temptation or we don't pass a test is just because we were trying to do it on our own and we forgot to ask Him for His protection.
Yeah.
And that's in a lot of ways, that's the whole point of the tests and the temptations is we can't do this. God is the only one that can stop sin and can protect us from sin and the only one who can get us into heaven and into the next life properly. And if we don't realize that while we're here, we don't really get a second chance.
Yeah, we've got to learn that lesson for sure.
So realize where your protection should be coming from. Realize what your protection is protecting you from. Is it physical? Is it spiritual? What are you praying for God to protect you from? And that's really, really important because praying, asking God about day to day, everyday things, physical things, nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, the spiritual is more important. And we need to all keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot more that we could say on this topic, and a lot, and we may come back and touch on another aspect of it at some point in the future. But hopefully, we just God will ultimately what we want Him to do is deliver us from the destruction that Satan wants for us. Not necessarily, we've said it before. The worst thing that can happen to a Christian is not death. We don't necessarily look forward to death. We don't think it's a great thing. The Bible does say death is an enemy. But at the same time, that's not the worst thing that can happen to a Christian. It's far worse for someone to live and fall away from the Lord and become unfaithful to Him and then die in that condition than it would have been for that person to die while they're faithful. And so that's something that we need to consider. But death is there. It's a constant in life. Except for Enoch and Elijah, everybody's gone through it at least once. And some people died twice. And but the problem is spiritual death and being lost eternally. That's what we should really be concerned about. And that's what we should really be looking for when we're praying to God, to see that things that happen here will not lead to that situation.
Hope you'll come back tomorrow for more talking about prayer. Hope you learned something from this one or remembered something you already knew. Hope it helped you out somehow. And keep all this in mind.
And keep talking to God.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.